Hi guys, we're on to our next video here, and as you saw in the previous videos, sometimes your internal flash on your point-and-shoot camera will work just fine. As a matter of fact, it was easier to get a small compact camera into strange tight spaces of a vehicle than it is a bulky DSR. We saw that with the vehicle shots in last week's video. But there is a particular type of evidence that requires a specific lighting technique to capture hidden evidence, and that's the technique we're going to talk about today. And with this technique, it's really helpful to have an external flash unit. And I understand that a lot of you guys don't, and that's fine. Even if you don't, you're still going to be able to capture this evidence, and I'm going to talk to you about this concept and show you the tricks on how to get it done with the next few slides. So today we're talking about oblique lighting. So as you saw in the vehicle exam photographs and when we were dealing with high contrast scenes in the outdoor patio area, shadows can be very distracting and sometimes we have to get rid of them, but they can also be really helpful. Shadows convey depth and detail to the person viewing the photographs, so it's important that you know how and when to use them. When we photograph three-dimensional evidence on scenes like tire tracks, shoe prints, or even fingerprint impressions, you don't want an even distribution of light. If you use your internal flash from above or directly across from the evidence, you're going to miss out on key details. And in this video, I'll walk you through the steps that we take on crime scenes to capture this type of evidence. I'll show you some actual crime scene evidence that I've photographed. But I'm also going to walk you through a modified version of photographing three-dimensional evidence that you can create using your point-and-shoot camera. So to begin, let's look at how we professional crime scene photographers go about capturing this evidence on a crime scene. Okay, the first thing that we want to do in a crime scene is to make sure that we have a key essential tool for this type of photography is a tripod. Again, I understand that a lot of you guys don't have one, but I want you to know the setup that we use on scenes. And this is just in my backyard with my point and shoot and my own personal tripod. The ones that we use on scene are a lot more heavy duty because they have to hold up a digital SLR. But the point of these photographs is to show you that when you're taking three-dimensional evidence photographs, especially if you want them to be comparison level photographs, and by comparison level I mean that you're going to give them to a shoe print examiner or a latent print examiner and ask them to make an identification based on the photographs that you took, you have to make sure that your camera is 90 degrees to your evidence. You can also refer to that as film plane parallel, because the back of the camera is parallel to the surface of the evidence on. So you can refer to it either way, but the point is that you need to make sure that you're not creating any distortion by coming at your evidence from an angle. So once the camera has an external flash attached to it, like the ones you saw last week, you can put that flash, which is your light source, anywhere you want. So for 3D prints like tire tracks and shoe prints, you really want that flash unit as oblique as possible. And by oblique, that means a very shallow angle, so it's side lighting, basically. Here's a little demonstration of that. Okay, this would be on-shoe flash. Okay, your internal flash unit, or if you left your external flash mounted to your hot shoe right on top of the camera, okay, that's not what we want. We're going to lose detail if we do that. Instead, you want off shoe or oblique flash, and here the evidence is just on the floor basically of the slide there, and you're lighting it from the side. Okay, that's the kind of lighting that you want because that is what's going to highlight the detail in that three-dimensional evidence. So notice in these shots how different the print looks just by changing where the flash is positioned. This is a shoe print that I took on a homicide probably about a year ago. It's not the best impression evidence. There's not a whole lot of detail in this print, but it does show you a really good example of how different a shot can look just based on changing the angle of your flash, rotating your flash around the evidence, and using that shadow to really highlight the three-dimensional evidence that's there. Now, the rulers that you see in these shots are L rulers, that's what we call them. They are put out by the American Board of Forensic Odontology. They're mainly used for bite mark impressions, but we've adopted them to be able to use them for shoe print and tire as well. The circles on the ruler, the ones at the tips and also at the bend, those are perfect circles. And the reason that they are perfect circles is that they help you make sure that you're actually 90 degrees on top of the evidence, okay? Film plane parallel or perpendicular with the lens and your evidence plane. If you diverge a little bit from 90 degrees, if you come in at an angle, those circles are going to start to look kind of like ellipses. They're going to look like ovals. So that's our little check to make sure that we are film plane parallel. We use angle finders on scenes as well, but crime scenes are rather dynamic elements, and a lot of things are going on at the same time, so it's possible your tripod could get bumped, your camera could get knocked over. You aren't really sure. So while we use the angle finders to make sure that our camera back is film plane parallel, those circles on the ABFO rulers really can tell you whether or not you're at that exact right angle. And the photos themselves can actually be adjusted to the correct angle using those circles in Photoshop if they need to be. So the same is true here. We're taking photographs of the same shoe print, but we're moving around the evidence and we're taking different shots. And that's what we do on crime scenes. We can take several photographs of the same piece of evidence just to make sure that we're highlighting all of its three-dimensional evidence from all the different angles. So I could start taking photographs with the flash oblique at the toe of the shoe, rotate it to the right side of the shoe, then back to the heel, and then to the other side of the shoe. So I want to make sure that I'm taking as many photographs as I need so that the entire surface of the shoe is highlighted. This is a picture that I took of my fingerprint in microsil. Microsil is kind of like a putty that we use to collect three-dimensional evidence, and it highlights very fine, minute three-dimensional evidence really, really well. And this picture was taken just of the microsil dead on with a flash on shoe directly over the evidence. So not the way we would normally do it for three-dimensional evidence. And keep your eye on that area that has the blue arrow highlighting it. Okay. Now I've changed the angle of the flash. It's coming in the different angle, and it's more oblique. And you notice how the detail in the top right is brought out more by changing that flash angle. So that area looked completely blank in the slide before, and now we can tell there's actually some ridge detail there. So changing that angle is really, really important. So guys, I realize that most of you are limited by your camera and that almost all of you do not have an external flash, and that's fine. What you can do, and what I'm going to walk you through, is the exercise for this week. And you can do this kind of photography without an external flash unit. But what you need to do is turn the flash off and use a flashlight to highlight the shadows that you need. So for this assignment, for this week, you need to create three-dimensional evidence. And the way that you can do this is you can choose any item that has some impression on it. It can be a fingerprint or any other object small enough to fit on a small piece of Play-Doh. That's what we're going to use. So you can use a quarter, you can use a penny, and push that into the Play-Doh. Anything you want to use, but keep it small because we're dealing with macro photography. So for your individual assignment, you want to set up your evidence kind of like I have here. Because we don't have tripods, and it's very difficult to hold the camera above evidence without a tripod and use oblique lighting at the same time, what we're going to do is we're going to take the whole setup and just turn it on its side. So you might need to prop up your camera on a book or some other stationary object to get it at the right height, but you want to make sure that your lens is 90 degrees from the evidence. So in these few shots coming up here, what I've done is just taken a piece of Play-Doh, flattened it out with, the round part of, say, a rolling pin or a glass, whatever you want to use, or your fingers if you have to. And I've pushed a thumbprint right into the middle of it. Now, because Play-Doh is kind of sticky, it works really well for our exercise. So I just put it on the edge of a book, and set it up across from my camera lens, 90 degrees, right? Here's another shot of the same setup. Now you might have to play around a little bit with the distance that the camera is to the fingerprint, depending on if you have macro setting or not on your camera, or you might actually have to play around with focus, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. So for your first shot, just leave the lights in the room on and try to focus as closely as you can on the impression evidence. So use the macro function if you have it, and if you need to move the camera closer or farther away because you're having a hard time focusing, go ahead and play around with that distance. Another trick that you can use, now remember what we talked about, that really key important idea about digital cameras and focusing. They need color contrast. So if you're composed completely on this piece of Play-Doh that's pretty much blue, there's not a whole lot of color contrast going on there, right? So what you can do is take something like a credit card or a dollar bill or something that has some contrast to it, maybe some writing on it. Hold that at the same plane as your evidence. Push down your shutter release button so that your camera tries to focus. You'll hear that little dee-dee. When you hear that, keep your shutter release button down, remove the credit card or dollar bill or whatever you used, and then go ahead and take the photograph, because you're focusing on the same plane. So that's a little trick that we can use. There's another one I'm going to show you in a few. So this photograph down at the bottom of the screen is taken just with the flash on, normal setup, lights on in the room. Evidence is 90 degrees from the camera, and it's just a regular internal flash photograph. So for your next sequence of shots, go ahead and turn your camera flash off, and you're going to use a flashlight to light the impression from the side. I would suggest turning the lights off in the room too, because the detail, especially if you're using a fingerprint, is very fine, so it might be hard to see if you have some other ambient light. But in this shot, you can see how the ridge detail just popped out of the picture with the use of that lighting technique. And with these shots, I'm moving the flashlight around the print. So I'm highlighting different areas of the print based on where that flashlight is aimed at it. Here's another one. And you'll see in these shots that sometimes when you move the flash, you'll lose detail in one area, but you'll highlight it in another. And that's fine. That's the reason that we take as many pictures as we do of three-dimensional evidence. We want to make sure that we have enough photographs that capture all of the details. That's why we take as many as we do. So, did any of you catch what was wrong with those last three images? Filling the frame, right? They weren't bad shots, and they were composed pretty tightly, but the fingerprint itself is actually longer than it is wide, right? So I should have been holding the camera vertically while taking those shots. So here's another shot with the camera held appropriately. You can see it fills the frame a whole lot better. That mark on the left-hand side is actually a pen mark that I made. I was adding contrast to the background. Obviously, that's not something that we would do on normal scenes, but you guys can go ahead and do that for this exercise. Usually when we take these kind of photographs, we have scales involved, and those will add contrast and help you focus. But if you find that your camera is really having trouble focusing, go ahead and take a permanent marker and just mark a line somewhere in your image so that your camera has something to focus on. Okay, good luck guys. Have fun snapping your three-dimensional evidence, and remember, I'm here if you have any questions. See you in the classroom.